Speaker.
Could we have some order, please? The honourable member is asking a question, and it is his right. The honourable.
I have a very serious question, Madam Speaker.
The honourable member.
I was talking to the Ontario MPP for Kiiwetinoong, Sol Minakwa just now. Madam Speaker, he has 14 nations in his riding that don't have clean drinking water. The Conservatives could have used an opposition day to call on the government to tackle it. There's no Canadian that should go without clean drinking water in this country, Madam Speaker. Instead of bringing forward motions that can't be applied nationally, when will the Conservatives take on that challenge, Madam Speaker? Because it's actually represented by a Conservative in this House. This is a very important issue.
Chatham-Kent-Limington.
If I recall, it was a Conservative government that put the Truth and Reconciliation recommendations in place, and it's been this Liberal government that has not followed through. I will gladly support clean drinking water for every First Nation. But 1.5 million trips to the food bank by Canadians, every single Canadian eats. This opposition day motion reduces the cost of food and does not hinder our environmental targets. So I will support every Canadian eating. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for Thornhill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. It's a privilege to rise and add my thoughts to the debate, and it's shocking, actually, to watch the mental gymnastics that is taking place in this House to say that the rising inflation that every Canadian is feeling and the carbon tax has nothing to do with the cost of food. I've heard that a number of times. Look, anyone watching in this country right now is affected by the price of food, because regardless of all other things that we talk about, and there are lots of important things that we talk about in this place, if people can't feed themselves, they simply can't do anything else. And if you're worried about feeding your family, well, not you, if they're worried about feeding their families, they simply don't have the luxury necessarily of worrying about some of the other issues that we discuss here. And if kids aren't eating, their school, their growth, their health all suffers. We usually think of things like mass food insecurity happening in other nations who simply don't have the bounty that Canada has, but we never think about it in our own country on such a mass scale. But the sad state of affairs in Canada right now is such that more people are being driven into poverty by failed economic policy from the government. Many rely on food banks and some aren't eating at all. And if that's not important, then I think we should all question why we're here. How do we know this? Well, our constituents tell us every day. Just last week, I got an email from somebody in Thornhill. He said, I've lived in Canada for 8 years now. I'm a student and I work and I pay my taxes. Our rent is being increased, food is being increased, and I'm on one student's salary and I'm in so much debt. Instead of building our life here, we're being ruined by the piling debt because of government inefficiency. That's right from their constituents. I assume members opposite or members in this House are hearing similar refrain. It's not just people in our communities that are telling us this, it's also the statistics. A survey from Angus Reid found that not too long ago that nearly 60% of Canadians are having a hard time affording enough food for their families. Food Banks Canada, an organization, recently revealed that food bank use in 2022 was at its highest level ever recorded. That's nearly 1.5 million Canadians used a food bank in just 1 month. That's 35% up just in 2 years. I want to make something clear, Madam Speaker. We are a G7 country. We are one of the richest countries in the world. When people can't even afford food, there is something wrong in Canada. So we should ask, what is it? And then, how do we make it better? And I've heard a lot of rhetoric from the other side about these two questions today. The Liberals say it's all because of Putin's war, and it's all due to international phenomenons. Even though we know that 0.3% of our trade is with Russia and Ukraine combined, and that inflation in this country was already double, well, 2.5 times higher than the target rate was when the war started. It's always something else. It's always someone else. It's always somewhere else. It's a complete abdication of the responsibility from the people in charge of this country, the people who continue to want more control and less responsibility. And what do we see the NDP saying? Well, they're saying the entire inflation crisis is due to what they're calling greedflation, companies taking on unreasonable amounts of profits, and that there's nothing else at play here. Madam Speaker, they're missing the bigger picture because there's somebody else that's taking away more money than their fair share from Canadians, from their paychecks, from their hard work. And that's the same Liberal government that they're propping up in their supply and confidence agreement. The greed that is making this crisis a crisis is the greed of the federal government, the greed of power, and the greed of politics, because they're actually profiting from inflation. The fall economic statement showed that the government revenues went up more than $40 billion. Because the cost of everything is going up. People are having a harder and harder time making their paychecks last, and the Liberals want a share of that too, because they're increasing the tax or the premiums on EI and CPP. Then it's a plan to triple the carbon tax, the one that they said they wouldn't hike, the one that Canadians are paying more into than they're getting back, the one tax that hasn't met a single environmental target this government has ever set, ever. We know that people are struggling and they're looking for hope and they're looking for real leadership and a real plan from a federal government. But it's no surprise that the people who got us into this mess have no plan to get us out of it, because what they're proposing is more of the same. Tripling the tax on food, on gas, on groceries, on nearly everything else, on home heating. More than that, new fertilizer restrictions on Canadian farmers that are going to make it even harder for them to grow good, nutritious, affordable food right here in our country. And they're going to keep the reckless spending and the deficits, and they're going to keep the waste and the tax hikes and the mismanagement, and it's making inflation even worse. We saw yesterday another rate hike of 0.5%. That's the 7th one in a row. How are people going to pay for this? We know that the Liberal plan is costing Canadians. The bank governor said so. The one before that one said so too. And it's not just because of them bringing us here, but it's also where we're going. The latest food price report released this week estimates that food prices are going up another 5 to 7%. That's $1,000 of after-tax income for a family, for a typical family, to pay a typical grocery bill. Where do families find that money? We've got to do something, because this isn't sustainable and it's not okay. And the Liberals aren't going to, if they're not going to listen to the millions of Canadians that are raising the alarm bells, at least there's one party in this House, it seems, after today that is listening. We're calling on the government to cancel the carbon tax on everything food production related, including farm fuels, grain drying, fertilizer, transportation, to bring immediate relief. They can do something now. They hear it. They hear it when they go back to their constituencies. They hear it from people who can't afford to eat in a G7 country, in a rich country, in a country like Canada. We've taken major steps already on this. Bill C-34 from my colleague from Huron, Bruce, would exempt the carbon tax from natural gas and propane used on farms. I want to remind colleagues from the NDP and the Bloc that they voted for that. And they can vote for this one. They can do the right thing by their constituents. There's even more that we could be doing. We could be growing more food right here in Canada. We could be supporting good-paying jobs. We could be lowering prices at the same time. And the fact that members in this House don't think that this issue is important, or, talking about it being Groundhog Day, well, that might be the case for them. But this is what Canadians are actually talking about, and this is what Canadians are actually struggling with. When our neighbors are making decisions about feeding themselves, we've lost the plot. And Canadians will remember that this is the government that told us that interest rates would stay low. They told us that the carbon tax wouldn't go up. They told us that the problem was deflation and not inflation. And they told us that everything would be okay. Madam Speaker, we have record inflation. We have a plan to triple the carbon tax. We have the highest interest rates since the 1990s, the highest in the G7, and everything is not okay. It's time that the inflationary taxing and deficits that have led to this stop. It's time that we put people back in control of their lives. Let them keep their own money. This is not our money. We've got to be able to do the very basic thing of helping Canadians feed themselves in Canada. Reducing taxes, capping government waste, removing red tape, those are just some of the best ways to end the inflation crisis. We talk about it here every single day. This is trickled down to the ability for people to feed their families, to feed themselves, to be productive. The solution is not going to be bigger budgets. It's not going to be higher taxes. It's never going to be more government. It's the exact opposite of what we're seeing. My time here is limited, but if I were to list all the things we could be doing better, I'd be here all day. But I want to be clear, this specific proposal today, it's not the silver bullet that's going to make all of the problems go away. It's not the magic fix, but it will help. And anything that we can do to help Canadians right now is something worth doing. They're watching. When our very ability for our neighbors and our constituents to feed themselves is at risk, it is incumbent for us to act in this place because it's too important not to. So supporting this is just a start, and I hope that members in this House will do the right thing and spare Canadians their support for a failed carbon tax, one that they said wouldn't go up, one that they said would reduce emissions, which hasn't, one that is costing consumers and driving the cost of everything up. But today I hope they'll find just an ounce of courage to start with food, to start with the production of the very basics of the thing that we need to feed ourselves in this country. That's the least they can do by supporting this motion.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. And I wonder if the member can provide her thoughts in regards to the last federal election. In the last federal election, the member, like 337 other Conservative candidates, had adopted a policy platform position saying to all Canadians that the Conservative Party of Canada supports a price on pollution. Today, Madam Speaker, contrary to what they told Canadians they were committed to doing and advocating for, they've taken a complete and absolute reverse on that position. And I'm wondering, how would the member justify that policy reversal to her constituents today?
Honourable Member for Thornhill.
Oh, Madam Speaker, I don't have all day, but if we wanted to talk about all of the broken promises from all of the platforms of the last number of elections from the Liberals, we could be here all day. The fact of the matter is that the carbon tax doesn't work. They haven't met a single target. It costs Canadians more than they pay. They said the opposite. They also said that it would never go up. This is not the carbon tax that they presented to Canadians. This is not the carbon tax that they voted for. This is not even the government that Canadians put in place because of the supply and confidence agreement based on policies they never brought to the Canadian population. That's what the members should be asking about. Why continue to support a failed carbon tax that costs more and does nothing in terms of their own targets?
Questions and comments. L'honorable député de Thérèse de Blainville.